Welcome, truth seekers, to Tangled Logic, where we delve into the strange, the dark, and the mysterious. Today, we're exploring 3 forbidden places and the individuals who dared to venture where they shouldn't. Prepare yourselves for tales that will twist your perception of reality and leave you questioning the boundaries of the known. These are not mere stories. They are glimpses into the abyss, brought to you with the commitment to uncover the unsettling truths hidden within our world. So, settle in, dim the lights, and let Tangled Logic illuminate the shadows. At approximately 11:30 a.m. on August 14, 2005, 2 Greek military fighter pilots soared above Athens, Greece, in their jets. Their mission: to observe a Boeing 737 commercial airplane. Helios Airways Flight 522, the plane, which had departed Cyprus at 9 a.m. with 121 souls on board, was inexplicably circling over the city, having missed its scheduled landing in Athens 45 minutes prior. Shortly after takeoff, contact with Flight 522's pilots had been lost, sparking concerns within the military of a possible hijacking and an impending crash. In response, these 2 fighter pilots were dispatched to ascertain the situation. Upon reaching Flight 522, they initially observed no outward signs of distress, no fire, no smoke, no visible damage. They maneuvered their jets alongside the commercial plane, peering into its windows. What they saw sent chills down their spines. All the oxygen masks were deployed, and every passenger slumped in their seats appeared unconscious, their masks still strapped to their faces. The fighter pilots couldn't discern if the passengers were merely unconscious or deceased, but their immediate concern was the state of the cockpit crew. They carefully positioned their jets parallel to the cockpit, hoping to find Pontius pilots. Instead, they saw a man, clearly not in a pilot's uniform, looking out at them and casually waving. This unexpected sight left the fighter pilots bewildered. Before they could react to this bizarre encounter, the man in the cockpit gestured downward with his index finger, and moments later, Flight 522 began its descent. To comprehend the unfolding tragedy, we must rewind to just before 9 a.m. that same morning. The crew of Flight 522 had conducted their routine safety checks and deemed the aircraft ready for takeoff. However, a critical oversight had occurred. A maintenance person had inadvertently left a crucial knob switched to the wrong setting, a detail missed by everyone. The plane took off on schedule, and for approximately 2 minutes, everything seemed normal. Then, alarms blared and oxygen masks deployed from the ceiling. The knob, set incorrectly, controlled the breathable air supply in the aircraft, essentially turning it off. Passengers, and critically, the pilots rapidly lost consciousness as the masks descended. Amidst the chaos, only one person remained awake: 25-year-old flight attendant Andreas Pomo. Instead of grabbing a standard overhead mask, Andreas, who was also training to be a pilot, knew their limited oxygen supply. He quickly connected himself to an emergency oxygen tank, which offered a significantly longer duration of breathable air. As he surveyed the unconscious passengers, he gradually realized the grim reality. The plane was flying in circles, and the pilots were also incapacitated. The aircraft was essentially flying itself, with no one at the controls. Faced with a horrifying choice, either passively await the inevitable crash or attempt to intervene, Enria chose to act. He stood up, secured his emergency oxygen tank, and made his way into the cockpit. He carefully moved the unconscious pilots aside, then attempted to take control of the massive Boeing 737. The fighter pilots, who had observed the random guy waving from the cockpit, were unknowingly witnessing Andreas's desperate attempt. Despite his pilot training, Andreas lacked the expertise to fly such a complex aircraft. The situation worsened dramatically when, shortly after he entered the cockpit, the plane ran out of fuel. It immediately exited its automatic holding pattern and began an uncontrolled descent towards Athens, a bustling city. Knowing he couldn't land the plane safely, Andreas made a heroic final decision. He glanced at one of the fighter pilots outside his window, gesturing to signal the plane's descent. Then, with a profound act of self-sacrifice, he gripped the aircraft's yoke and intentionally banked the plane hard to the left, steering it away from Athens. He guided Flight 522 into an unpopulated hillside where it tragically crashed. Andreas and all 120 other souls on board perished. However, his courageous act ensured that not a single person on the ground was harmed. On the evening of February 1, 2009, 32-year-old Luo Jinfa stood in the doorway of his cramped, air-conditioning-less apartment in Taiwan, enduring a stern lecture from his landlord about overdue rent. Luo had moved into the downstairs unit just 2 months prior, in December. Unemployed, he knew this humble dwelling was all he could afford. As his landlord berated him, reiterating his right to evict Luo if the rent wasn't paid and questioning Luo's financial responsibility, Luo remained silent, patiently awaiting his opportunity. He wasn't focused on the rent. He desperately needed to ask his landlord a bizarre yet crucial question. After about 5 minutes of relentless admonishment, the landlord paused, scribbling notes to calculate potential interest charges. Luo seized the moment, interrupting. "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I actually need to ask you something." The landlord, caught off guard by Luo's unexpected assertiveness, looked at him with an expression of annoyance, as if to say, "What possible question could you have?" Luo then blurted out, "Do you know if anyone's been murdered inside of my apartment?" The landlord stared at Luo, seemingly unable to process the question. After a moment of stunned silence, the shock melted away, replaced by renewed irritation. "You know what?" he snapped. "I know what's wrong with you. I'll be back in a month, and you better have your rent." With that, the landlord turned and walked away, leaving Luo's strange question unanswered. Luo was indeed stressed about the rent, having no money and no idea how he would pay his landlord in a month. However, a far more pressing issue was the series of increasingly unsettling events occurring within his apartment, which had prompted his peculiar inquiry. The lack of an answer only intensified his anxiety. As the landlord disappeared down the hall, Luo hesitantly turned back, re-entered his apartment, and shut the door. Immediately, a wave of terror washed over him. 1 month later, on March 2, 2009, the day after the rent was due, Luo's landlord still hadn't received payment. He spent the entire day attempting to contact Luo by phone, but his calls went unanswered. Eventually, the landlord went to Luo's apartment and, after receiving no response to his knocks, used his own key to let himself in. The landlord harbored a negative impression of Luo, considering him odd and irresponsible. He expected the apartment to reflect this perception, but even he was taken aback by the scene within. The apartment was in utter disarray. Furniture was haphazardly arranged and stacked against walls. Empty alcohol bottles littered the floor, and a freezer had been moved to the center of the living room. It was a complete mess. What truly unnerved the landlord, however, were the numerous yellow and red pieces of paper plastered all over the walls. These papers, covered in prayers, had been repeatedly stabbed into the walls with individual knives. The landlord, bewildered by the sight, immediately decided he was done with Luo. He would evict him. He quickly searched the apartment to confirm Luo wasn't present, found it empty, then left. He locked the apartment, purchased a new lock, replaced the old one, and resolved that Luo would never return. Indeed, Luo never did. The landlord never had to worry about him coming back. For months, Luo's old apartment sat empty. 7 months later, the landlord's brother approached him, asking if he could rent out the unused apartment. The landlord agreed, but stipulated that his brother would have to clean it, as it hadn't been touched since Luo's departure. A couple of days later, on October 18th, the landlord and his brother met at the apartment. They systematically cleaned it out, removing all the furniture, lamps, and some of Luo's old clothes and belongings. They loaded everything into a truck and drove to a nearby recycling facility, selling what they could and discarding the rest. They then left. However, as workers at the recycling facility began processing the junk, they made a shocking discovery that immediately led them to contact the police. It turned out Luo had not abandoned his apartment. In fact, he had never truly left it. Luo had become utterly convinced that his apartment was haunted. He claimed to hear footsteps above him at night, despite knowing the apartment directly overhead was unoccupied. He also reported seeing shadowy figures wandering within his living space. It's important to note that Luo struggled with mental health issues and drug use, but he adamantly told anyone who would listen that something genuinely strange was occurring in his apartment. He began to suspect that perhaps someone had been murdered there, and their ghost was now tormenting him, hence his unsettling question to his landlord. This relentless haunting, or whatever it was, continued night after night, day after day, driving Luo to the brink of madness. However, Luo discovered one sanctuary within his apartment that seemed to offer him some protection: his bedroom. Yet his bedroom was not a conventional room. 'Twas the large freezer the landlord had found in the middle of his living room. Luo had been climbing inside the freezer and shutting the lid to shield himself from the perceived entity at night. Crucially, he always propped the lid open just enough to allow air circulation, as the freezer was airtight. However, shortly after his conversation with the landlord about overdue rent, Luo, heavily intoxicated, had climbed into his freezer bedroom, shut the lid, and tragically forgotten to prop it open. As he lay there, he slowly suffocated to death due to the lack of air circulation. After he died inside his freezer, his body remained undiscovered. 7 months later, when Luo's landlord and his brother emptied the apartment, they transported that freezer, along with all the other discarded items, to the recycling facility. It was there that the workers, upon opening the freezer, made the chilling discovery of Luo's body. On August 4, 2019, 28-year-old Sum Umora departed his farm in rural Cambodia and ventured into the dense jungle. His objective for the day was to ascend the nearby Chakri mountain and collect as much bat guano as possible. Bat guano, or bat droppings, is a highly effective fertilizer, and the Cambodian jungles, including Chakri Mountain, are dotted with cave systems teeming with bats, making them prime locations for harvesting this valuable resource. Sum and his family relied on collecting guano to support their farm, as it was their primary source of income. On this particular day, Sum wasn't aiming for random caves. His mission was to reach a specific cave known for its abundant guano supply. Other local guano harvesters avoided this cave due to its extremely narrow, tight, and inherently dangerous passages. However, Sum's slender build allowed him to navigate such confined spaces, giving him access to this rich, untapped source. After approximately an hour of hiking through the jungle and descending the mountain, Sum finally arrived at the cave's entrance. It was a modest opening, roughly 3 feet by 3 feet, with limited visibility into its depths. Undeterred, Sum, familiar with the terrain, immediately dropped to his stomach. He retrieved his flashlight, grabbed his guano bag, which had a long strap for dragging, and began wriggling his way into the opening. The cave system was structured with a narrow, tunnel-like entrance that extended straight ahead. Periodically, along this tunnel, there were wider pockets or openings where Sum could maneuver onto his hands and knees and move around more freely. These larger spaces, or caverns, were where the bats roosted, and consequently, where the majority of the guano accumulated. Sum's immediate goal was to reach these caverns and commence his harvesting. He wriggled forward, successfully navigating the initial tunnel section, and entered the first cavern. As anticipated, numerous bats clung to the ceiling, and a good pound of guano lay on the ground. He scooped it all into his bag and continued through the tunnel towards the next cavern. As he traversed the second stretch of tunnel, his flashlight beam revealed what appeared to be moving walls in the upcoming cavern. He knew, however, that it wasn't the walls themselves, but a dense congregation of bats. From his perspective, this next cavern seemed to house a significantly larger bat population than the first. Theoretically, this promised a massive quantity of guano, potentially enough to fill his bag entirely and allow him to conclude his expedition after this single cavern. However, there was a minor obstacle. Sum had visited this location many times and was aware of a small irregularity on the ground at the threshold of the second cavern, a crack running perpendicular to the tunnel's path. Although only about 6 inches wide, when illuminated, it appeared to descend endlessly into the earth, a seemingly bottomless chasm. Sum always felt a sense of unease when crossing this crack, as there was no way to bypass it. He had to go directly over it. His thoughts invariably drifted to what unknown horrors might reside within that deep, dark hole in the Kiva primal fear akin to bathyphobia, the fear of deep waters. Despite his apprehension, he knew the potential reward of abundant guano made the risk worthwhile. Sum wriggled his way through the tunnel, reached the crack, and shined his light down. Once again confronted by the seemingly endless void, he took a deep breath and carefully maneuvered himself over it. As he successfully crossed and was about to enter the cavern to collect his expected bounty of guano, he felt a sudden tug. Terror gripped him, and he whipped his head around, expecting some unseen assailant. To his relief, nothing was grabbing him. It was his guano bag, trailing behind him on its long strap that had snagged on the crack. His initial fear dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief. He grabbed the strap and gently jimmied the bag free. But as he did, he fumbled his flashlight, which tumbled backward, rolling directly into the crack. Sum watched in horror as the light bounced and jostled, plummeting down the fissure. Then it abruptly stopped, wedged at some point, its beam shining straight up, surprisingly close to the surface. Sum thought, "This is bad. I can't lose my flashlight. I need to see to collect the guano and to find my way out. But it's right there, so I'll just reach into that horrible crack and retrieve it, and everything will be okay." He carefully backed himself up, positioned himself directly over the crack, and peered down at the flashlight, wedged about 1.5 to 2 feet below the surface, still pointing straight up. Sum was reluctant to extend his arm into the crack, all his fears of the unknown depths resurfacing. Yet, the flashlight was essential. He took a deep breath, mentally prepared himself, and blindly reached into the crack, hoping to grasp the flashlight and yank it out quickly. He stretched, but couldn't quite reach it. He twisted and turned his body, forcing his shoulder deeper and deeper into the narrow opening, until he could finally touch the flashlight. Just as his fingers closed around it, something unexpected happened. That night, Sum did not return to his farm. His family, initially unconcerned, as he often spent a couple of days on these guano expeditions, began to worry after 2 more days passed without his return. Sum's brother ultimately decided to search for him. Having frequently collected guano with Sum, he knew roughly where his brother preferred to go, including his favorite cave on the mountain. Upon arriving at the familiar spot, Sum's brother, who was of similar build, also managed to navigate the tight tunnel. He got down on his stomach, flashlight in hand, and called into the cave for Sum, but received no answer. He continued until he reached the first cavern, finding no trace of his brother. As he was about to enter the second cavern, his light illuminated a bag on the ground. It was Sum's guano bag. He knew his brother had been here and began shouting his name, but again, there was no reply. Then, as the brother paused to listen, he heard a faint human cry. "Is that you, Sum?" He called out, and another cry echoed back. He looked around, unable to spot Sum anywhere. The brother continued to shimmy his way toward the second cavern, and just as he began to cross the crack, he heard the cry again, this time coming from directly below him from within the crack. The brother shined his flashlight straight down, and there, wedged deep inside the crack, was Sum. It turned out that a few days prior, while reaching for his flashlight in the cave, Sum couldn't quite get his fingers around it. He kept twisting his body more and more until he was parallel with the crack itself. Then, just as he leaned down and got his hands on the flashlight, he rolled and fell into the fissure. His entire body had fit perfectly, plummeting several feet before becoming inextricably wedged. Trapped with nowhere to go, Sum lay in the crack for days, with no expectation of rescue. He was completely stuck, without food or water, certain he would die. He even wished he had a knife to end his own life. Fortunately for Sum, his brother found him. His brother sought help, and on the 4th day of Sum's ordeal, rescuers were able to pull him out. He made a full recovery. Sometimes, colleges invite me to give lectures on writing or horror or whatever else I pretend to be an expert on. These are enjoyable gigs. I fly out, stay in a hotel on their dime, and hopefully inspire the next generation of creatives. It's usually good for the soul. However, last March, a trip to the University of Kansas left my soul feeling deeply troubled. It was late when I landed, and a sophomore who worked at the student union, Christine, gave me a ride from the airport. Christine was quiet and didn't appear to be a horror fan, just a young woman doing her job. At least, that's what I thought, until she took a detour and pulled over by a cemetery. It was illuminated only by moonlight and surrounded by a barbed wire fence, seemingly to keep people out too, perhaps to keep something terrible in. My horror-tuned brain immediately started working overtime. I asked why we had stopped. Christine informed me that this was Stull Cemetery, reputed to be the most haunted place in all of Kansas. She wanted me to check it out. I politely declined, explaining that I was tired and, in my line of work, most haunted cemeteries tended to blend together. I expected her to laugh, but Christine insisted this one was different. Then, gripping the steering wheel, she asked if I was religious. Something about this girl felt off. She wasn't dangerous, but a pathetic, desperate need radiated from her. I replied that I was a believer in a higher power, in right and wrong, but not a scripture fanatic. Perhaps that's why in my wilder years, a few of my executives had suggested I was bound for hell. Christine let out a bitter laugh. "You don't want to go there," she said, her voice chillingly certain. "I know for a fact it's worse than you could ever imagine." My eyes widened as Christine explained why she had brought me here. Deep within this cemetery, amidst the ruins of a chapel, there lay a stairway to hell. And that brings us to the end of another journey into the strange, dark, and mysterious with Tangled Logic. We hope these tales of forbidden places and those who dared to trespass have left you with a lingering sense of awe and a healthy dose of unease. Remember, the world is full of hidden depths and untold stories, and we at Tangled Logic are committed to unearthing them for you each week. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and always question what lies beyond the visible. Join us again soon for more unraveling of the unknown. Like and subscribe.